Hey, in our podcast today, we're going to be talking about a basic primer for Christian nationalism. You heard this term thrown around. In fact, we're in a political cycle that is getting more and more intense, and words matter, and names matter, and actually naming someone or something is an act of warfare, or can be an act of warfare. So the warfare raged against all of us who love Jesus and who want to see Christian values in our public policy. The pejorative term for us is Christian nationalist. Are we Christian nationalists? Well, we're certainly Christians, and we certainly love our nation. Are either of those wrong? Well, not in our minds, but certainly in some folks' minds. So we're going to drill down deeper today into the discovery of why this is important, what these terms really mean, and how we can not shrink back when these terms are thrown at us as if there's something wrong about being a Christian nationalist. So what does it mean? How do we live it out? Should we live it out? We're going to be talking about that in our podcast today. I think you're going to really enjoy it.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Hey, this is your weekly dose of fun, inspiration, and I don't know what else we're offering, but I have
fantasy football tips.
Hey,
No,
I'm
just kidding.
2-0, just so everybody knows. I got off to an amazing start, and this is actually more for our producer Matthew. All right, we're sharing this together. This is actually in remembrance of the Bears' unexpected victory, which borders, does it not, Matthew? It borders on the miraculous, because I think I saw the data. The Bears were down 17-0 at one point, and they won the game without scoring an offensive touchdown. The defense scored one, special teams scored one. But I think that was only the third time in the whole history. I don't know how many thousands of games. I think over 3,000 games or something like that. It was only the third time that happened. So this borders on miraculous.
All right, so you want to hear the objective balloon popper?
Sure.
How's your QB doing?
Hey, he came out a little rough, but we got the W, and so I can't imagine being a rookie quarterback, or any quarterback for that matter, in the NFL, because if you don't win right out of the gate, the pressure starts mounting. And as we know, being Chicago people, like last year we saw this. They lost the first game. They lost the second game. Wasn't it four? They had first four or something like that. And then everybody starts talking. I can't imagine living under that criticism. So Matthew and I have agreed that the pressure is lifted, and now our star rookie quarterback can actually be himself and go out there and have fun and be the quarterback that we all are hoping he is going to be. How's that for a good analysis?
Good analysis. I would argue the quarterback position is probably, besides maybe the goalie, the most pressure-filled position in all of sports.
Absolutely. If you don't have a quarterback in the NFL, you're dead.
But the
dead.
pressure, the weight of the game on one person outside of the goalie in soccer, I don't know, maybe that's not even close.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a pressure filled. But man, I feel like these guys been doing this for many years. So anyways,
it's like, hey, we don't even want to get into the history of the Chicago Bears quarterbacks. It's been a dismal situation. But anyway, but hey, we were just talking about this too. We don't let football ruin our world. And if you're out there today and you're cheering the Bears on, but you're going to check yourself into a psych ward if they lost, it's probably a little too big in your life.
No, I've been there. It's so funny because some of these teams I used to cheer for, after their values and the views come out, I have to go through a rehab clinic.
Yeah,
I had to wean myself off.
I do the same thing with Hollywood stars. You know, when I find out what they stand for, if I don't like it, I'm not watching any of their movies.
I'm not, but I didn't attach myself to any of these. I did not marry any of these Hollywood. I emotionally married any of these Hollywood stars. I was very much married to a bunch of sports teams.
Now you're a Redskins guy, right? Because you came from the East Coast.
No, I was. It's all right. I knew lots of people who were Redskins fans, but
you weren't one of them.
Nah, not really.
Because the Redskins rookie quarterback is also my fantasy guy, and he killed it. All right, this last week. So
I grew up being a San Francisco fan. Actually,
really?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about the city. I just, I love the 49ers, like Joe Montana, Steve Young. I hate the Cowboys. Cowboys would beat the 49ers. And right now I think they have a pretty good team. The quarterback is I forgot the guy's name, but again,
Brock Purdy. Yep.
Since maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I have divorced myself from all these sports teams I used to super care about. I had to detox myself.
Just busy raising fam, lost interest.
And I'm just not cool with some of the value statements they have out. I'm just like, you know what? That doesn't represent me. That's not who I'm about. You guys.
Well, I'm looking for just a little blow off some steam.
Sure.
Stare at
Nothing
the TV.
wrong with that. But I'm no longer married to them in terms of my emotional attachment. That's my thing.
I got you.
Yeah.
People say, Pastor, what do you do on Sunday after a busy Sunday morning?
No,
I go home. I sit in the basement.
No, absolutely.
I turn on my TV and I just stare.
Zone out. I'm totally down with that. Yeah, I'm just talking about you talk about the team lose and it ruins your week.
Right.
I used to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
And it's not worth it. There's other things to break my heart to break for than sports.
And as we said too, you have to choose a team every election cycle, whether you like it or not. You got to choose a team. There's usually two viable teams. And it's something similar, you have to watch that if your team winning or loses, and obviously we said there's a lot at stake in an election, a lot more than a football game. But it's easy to even turn that into something that's idolatrous. And I think, we're going to certainly talk about and preach into what's at stake in this election, because I believe there's a lot at stake. We don't want to fall into the I'm in depression now after what happens or whatever, because we are kingdom people. Our focus is on what Jesus is doing, sovereignly doing on planet Earth, and we're going to do everything we can to help shape that and to help get good people and good policies. But at the end of the day, we have to trust the Lord after we've done all, right?
Well, I have to work. I get very emotionally attached to results. So whether sports or elections. So I have to work actually very, very hard to emotionally detach. I remember after 2012's election.
Yeah.
You and I both remember.
Oh, my gosh.
I was probably depressed for 2 months afterwards. I'll be real. I mean, I was emotionally.
Because there is a lot at stake.
And I just don't want to do that again. I don't want, ultimately, I cannot control what's happening in D.C., and I trust that God's in control. So I have to emotionally release myself to say, you know what, I cannot be addicted to the results.
Yeah. No, that's good. There's a fine line between being politically engaged, as we should be,
engaged,
and
still
being
care.
Politically guilty of political idolatry, which is not helpful at all.
Being held hostage over it. So,
yeah. So anyway, let's get into, if you've been watching our podcast, we're in a very cerebral and thought-provoking book by Pastor Doug Wilson called Mere Christendom. And I love the chapter today we're going to talk about, because I think it is so absolutely relatable to what's going on in our culture right now. It is called, at least we've entitled this, Christian Nationalism, a Primer. He starts off by stating the obvious, and we've gone into detail on this. The act of naming is an act of warfare, especially in the political environment in which we find ourselves. He says, in any cultural collision, which is what we're happening right now, each group wants to name the other one. Each group wants to prevent the other group from taking that name and turning it around to be used in a less pejorative sense, or even in a positive sense. And I would also argue that, when you name your opponent or you name their policies, what you're fighting for in every war is high ground. You're fighting for the moral high ground. And so if you can come out early and label something as evil or wicked and then attach it to the candidate or to your enemy, it's a tactic of war. And he gives some examples even in the church world. The word Methodist, when it was used for the Wesley brothers, was not a good word. It was a negative connotation. And the same thing, even to this day, this breaks my heart, because even to this day, the poor Puritans We use the word, you're being puritanical. And the idea is that the Puritans were a bunch of killjoys who didn't want to have any fun. They were the most committed group of people to the glory of God and to a passion for Christ and for head and heart united, in the pursuit of truth and godliness. They were not killjoys at all. And yet, that word is still to this day a negative word in many circles, not in my heart. And so he gets to today, he says Christians are called white supremacists, theo-fascists, religious extremists, but the one that they're trying to place on us in the selection cycle is the term Christian nationalist. So let's talk a little bit about this term, because obviously I think Livingstone's would certainly fall into that category. And I love what Wilson says. He says some of these terms are not that hard to diffuse. And so his response to that is, well, I'm a Christian and I do love my nation. Now what? So are you going to attack me for being a Christian? Are you going to attack me for loving my nation? If so, I don't think you're going to have very good, footing to stand on.
I think the problem is no one even, most of the purpose of that term is using it to persuade people who don't even think that deeply.
Right.
And it's not very deep. It's just like nationalism. It communicates this image of
Nazi Germany.
Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
We're the best nation. We're going to conquer everyone else. Everyone's going to be subservient under our rule. Because
and now you put Christian in front of it, and now you get into theocracy.
Yep.
You guys just want to shove your views and your worldview down our throat, and we got into a little bit of that last podcast.
Yeah.
But he says this, I'm a Christian. I'm not a globalist. I'm a Christian. I'm not a tribalist. I'm a Christian, and I have to live somewhere. So what shall we call that? And again, I like the way he's thinking. We're certainly not now this is an important point between Christian nationalism or globalism.
Yeah.
Those in charge today are certainly wanting a weakened America. I think what's happening at our border right now, allowing people just to come in and then shipping these people into local communities where they're overrunning the system, all in the name of somehow, being kind or warm-hearted or whatever. No, there's an agenda behind it. There's a globalist agenda behind this. It's looking to shrink America, to take us down a few notches so that we'll become a global player, right, with other nations under this big globalist agenda. So just the fact that we are for nations and we believe that nations are a good thing. In fact, you go back in the Bible, where did we first come into this idea of nations? It's at the Tower of Babel. God breaks the world into nations based on ethnic, linguistic differences. Yeah. And that was actually a good thing, because the concentration of power leads to evil things with fallen human beings. And so we are nationalists. We believe that nations and boundaries and all of that are good things. And so he says, if I'm not a globalist, if I'm, then who am I basically? Well, I'm a Christian and I live in a nation. I have to live somewhere, so I'm going to love the nation, that I live in.
Well, so even you went 4 layers deep. And I think the problem is most people are still on the first level, because we call it globalist. I think globalist is probably a pejorative term. It has a negative connotation to people like you and I.
Yeah, I use it as a pejorative term.
Right.
I think it's a wicked thing.
Right.
But other people
call it United Nations. Right? We don't want nations to go to war with each other.
World Health
Organization. We want a nation. We want the world, Earth, to be at world peace. And
so even there, good point. Okay, so is that a biblical idea? Well, it's a counterfeit utopia that we're trying to create, and a Christian would say that's all fine and dandy. But the Bible clearly teaches that because of our fallen nature, that's a pipe dream apart from the return of Jesus Christ. So nations are actually good things. They keep us from creating a fake global utopia that actually leads in tyranny and injustice and all kinds of pain and misery. But on the surface, who would not want
world
all
peace.
The nations together?
Yeah. No nuclear war and all these different things.
NATO.
Right.
I mean, all of these globalist organizations World Health Organization,
World Bank,
who's not for global health?
Right.
It sounds so sexy, and yet on the other side of it, we realize how demonic it is, because the people running these things are not submitted to, as we pointed out, an authority higher than themselves. So the question becomes, well, who's going to be the experts that are smart enough, wise enough, morally, pure enough to handle this kind of power for the common good? The answer is those people don't exist.
No, and who's going to advocate for us? And that's an important question. And we got to be careful, because the whole love your neighbors yourself, we can easily say, well, we don't need to advocate. We just need to just trust whoever. Well, that's when evil festers, when there is no direct accountability in your advocacy. And that's the problem we see a lot of times right now in the global scale, because we have hard enough time getting people to actually represent us from Washington, D.C. Can you imagine the people who represent us are in Brussels?
Or how about Iran or Iraq? I mean, we're talking about nations that share a completely diametrically opposed worldview. Or even atheism, a completely diametrically opposed worldview. So how do you have a united nations when you can't even unite around the worldview that you're promoting? And do I want someone that's an atheist or someone that's supports Islam or Buddhism representing me or telling me or my nation what's best for us? No, absolutely not. It's insanity. But again, it's that, you brought up a good point. We're going 4 layers deep. Most people just talk about world peace. They put a bumper sticker on their car and they think that's, yes, this is wonderful. They haven't put one iota of thought into going beneath the surface.
I do think, we talked about this before, that more and more people are waking up to that this world UN or world health or whatever is not what it seems to be. It's a power play. It's really about power and corruption and less about actually helping people. And that's why many European nations are returning to nationalism. They're saying, no, we got to close our borders.
Absolutely.
We're saying we want people who want all these global corporations out of our nation, because we want our representative, our prime ministers, our president to represent our people. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And we say our people, what we're really saying is our nation and the values. I mean, you're exactly right. There is a revolt happening across Europe where what they would call radical conservatives are getting elected. They're not that's another pejorative term. Extreme, make you feel extreme or whatever. No, these are people that are saying, look, when you allow mass immigration from nations that do not share your worldview, you end up losing your cultural distinctives. You lose your nation. And we're sick of it. We do not want to lose our nation. We do not want to lose the values that we share as a people. We do not want to, we're a peaceful, law-abiding nation. We're having people come in who do not share peaceful, law-abiding objectives and goals. And we're seeing chaos erupt in our nation. It's the same thing that's happening when you allow 20-some million illegal aliens to come into this country, many of those from nations who hate America. This is cultural suicide and cultural insanity. And so, number one, we shouldn't shrink back. Our point, you shouldn't shrink back from being a Christian nationalist because you believe in Christian nations and you believe in nations, period, not in some global world peace, kumbaya, pass me the bong so I can have another drag. We're gonna live forever in this one big happy love fest. It's a pipe dream, and it leads to unbelievable chaos and pain and misery for nations. So let's bring up another point that he shared that kind of puts a balance on things. He says a Christian nation should not be mistaken as being the same thing as a chosen nation. His point was, Israel was the only chosen nation by God, chosen to reveal his law, reveal his heart, reveal his goodness. When you get into the New Testament, we're actually called to make disciples of all nations. And so we have to kind of steer away from the rocky shore of suggesting that America was chosen by God the same way Israel was chosen by God. I think there has been the blessing on this nation. There's been Christian conviction and Christian policy and Christian thought and Christian biblical structure, all right, that led to an amazing, exceptional nation. I'll argue for that in just a minute. But what he's arguing is that we are called as Christians, New Testament believers, to actually create Christian nations, Christendom, across the world, and I don't think you can argue with that. That is the Great Commission, to disciple nations, not just our nation, but all the nations. Any pushback on that?
Yeah, I think it's, to me, it's just a little bit of semantics, because, I mean, if we have a chosen, I guess on a very literal level, yes, we are not chosen like the Israelites were chosen. God did not make a very specific covenant with George Washington like he did with Abraham, saying, hey,
well, in the Bible, we have in the Old Testament where God says, I chose you.
Yeah.
Israel, why did I choose you? Were you the greatest nation? No. Were you this? Right. No. Were you that? No. In fact, you were just the opposite, but I chose you for a divine purpose. We don't see that in the scriptures about, for instance, America, and yet we see the hand of God on America.
But at the same time, like, God chose all of us. There is a degree of, there might not be that specific chosenness, is that word, of like Israel, but can God choose different nations for their purpose?
Right.
So it's...
And certainly God, we have seen God use this nation to spread the gospel to the nations of the world in an absolutely unique and unprecedented way. You can see the hand of God. So, again, I think
maybe
your
the small C, not the big C.
Right.
I think he will agree with it. It's just like, okay, there's the chosen one, Jesus Christ, the chosen one, but then there's us. Like, do I feel like God's chosen us? Yes. Not like Jesus, but yes.
So he gets into another point here that made me kind of get a little reactionary, because he actually said the American exceptionalism of the neocons is actually an idolatrous construct. What we are urging is simply one more Christian nation among many, and to God be the glory. So what he's saying is the fact that America has somehow been singled out by God in an exceptional way, to the exclusion or detriment of all the other nations, he's arguing against that. And I think, again, we have to watch the nuance of that, because when I hear people like David Barton or other Christian, I would not call David Barton a neocon. He's a Christian, but he's talking about those folks that are using American exceptionalism that are not coming from maybe a Christian conviction. They're just saying America's great and we're the best and we're the greatest, et cetera, et cetera. But David Barton has highlighted this as far as American exceptionalism, seeing the blessing of God on a nation. He quotes Thomas Jefferson, "My God," he says, "how little do my countrymen know what precious blessings they are in possession of, and which no other people on earth enjoy." That sounds like he's saying America is exceptional, and what he's referring to is two things. Our stability as a nation. We've been under the same Constitution for over 200 years. Each year passing sets a new record for longevity, which is amazing. So we've enjoyed amazing stability as a nation. And the second area of exceptionalism is seen in our prosperity. We have been literally the most prosperous nation on the planet. And we've had the most inventions, the most Nobel Peace Prizes, more than all the rest of the world combined, and we're only 4% of the population. So you can certainly point to the effect of the blessing of God on this nation, but I think what Wilson, and maybe you and I would argue, is that those blessings are not exceptional or only for Americans. They're actually for every nation that would choose to honor God and put into practice some of the principles that this nation was founded upon.
Yeah, and I think if American exceptionalism is taken to be a sense of arrogance and pride,
right,
then I would agree. No, that's wrong. But if American exceptionalism, I can't even say the word, exceptionalism is taken as actually an act of humility to say, hey, it's not us. It's that we follow these principles.
Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord.
Then I think that's good for us to talk about that. And whether this leads to pride or leads to humility, I don't really know. I think it depends on the individual. I think there probably are many conservatives who use American exceptionalism and say that it's about pride. It's about we are...
Right.
And
again, that's completely anathema to the gospel.
Sure.
I think what we would agree on is, yes, we are exceptional. And here's the proof of our exceptionalism. But the reason behind it is available for you. Your nation could be equally exceptional in these areas. And in fact, God wants your nation to experience his blessing and goodness, but there's reasons behind that. And I think, when I think of the Great Commission, we're getting ready to go off to an African nation here in a couple of weeks and teach in the Roar School. I want people to understand that the dominion mandate, all the way back in Genesis, to take dominion over the planet and to rule and reign and to bring godly principles to bear on nations is an exciting availability for any national leader. Like I want national leaders in foreign countries to realize, you know what? You're going to have to take the scripture and apply it to your government if you want to see the exceptional blessings that God promises. Eventually, it's going to be a conflict there that you're going to have to face if you want to see the kingdom come in its fullness and the blessing of God come into its fullness. You're going to have to take biblical principles and apply them to real life situations, including government. But that to me gives hope to nations, right? That it's not, oh, you're in America and you're blessed. No, there's reasons behind our blessing, and it's actually available to you if you will take those blessings and apply them to your country.
Yeah, I would say there is a transformative power from the West through Christian worldview that has made the West a dominating culture. America is probably the pinnacle of that expression. Even though it started in Europe and kind of went to America. But
when you use the word West, not to interrupt, but when you use the word Western culture, Western civ, what you're really saying is Christendom. Christian
worldview, right.
Yeah.
And that's undeniably produced a degree of domineering culture. And when I say domineering, I mean both in the good and the bad way. It's domineering militarily, but also in ideas and in prosperity and growth, in education, in technology. And so there's definitely something different about Christian worldview / Western culture, Western civ. So that's undeniable. Now, you can't say it's just about America, obviously, because it started in the West. It didn't even start in America. But America has demonstrated these principles to a degree that we haven't seen before in other nations.
Exactly, and that should be celebrated. And we, as I think on this podcast, what we're trying to say is that there's a reason, like the proof's in the pudding. You can't argue about our prosperity. You cannot argue about our stability. You cannot argue about our strength economically, spiritually, and in every other way. That this is the basis for why we are blessed. And to me, that gives God glory. And then we go to other nations. We share these principles. Now, so here's the deal, though. We're living in a time in American culture where loving your nation is viewed as almost like evil. I mean, you go to our universities. I was just visiting my son's campus and we walked through the library. I was looking at all the latest books. There's a book there attacking evangelicals. There's a book there celebrating the beauty of consent to liberate us sexually to maximum enjoyment and pleasure, all this kind of. So there's all these weird, perverted worldviews, but it's very fashionable now in the books that our students are reading to bash America as a colonizer, an exploiter, a land grabber, all these things, which are, again, not necessarily full truths. We need to drill deeper on some of these claims, but the bottom line is loving your nation and being committed to your nation and being, I love America, is, that patriotic spirit is almost poo-pooed on in our culture today.
Yeah, it's very selective because, the same leftists who will say, hey, who basically denigrate America will celebrate the military, the sacrifice of military. They'll talk about how, Veterans Day, they will celebrate that, talk about the sacrifice for your nations. But you can't like one and dislike the other. And so for me, it's just very political. It's very political. It's whatever soundbite sounds good. I think the trend likes military and if someone is a Gold Star family, we should celebrate them. Okay, I'm going to go that way. Oh, the trend is that they at least really don't like people being patriotic. Let's go against that way. Like there's no cohesive thought.
Your American flag triggers me. We need you to not, display it in your front yard.
Because I've thought deeply, patriotism used to be, coming from the Chinese culture, which again, I don't even know what that means anymore. What does it mean to be Chinese anymore? That's a deep debate in itself.
That's our next podcast, by the way.
I'm not going to get into that. But traditionally in Chinese culture, loyalty and patriotism is the number one value. I mean, number one, not even close. Like, if you're you'd rather be the worst of the worst than be unpatriotic.
Sure.
You know, because people will, throughout history would call you unpatriotic, that you would be shamed for all eternity if you're unpatriotic, right? Yep. So patriotism and like to, you know, back them to the emperor or to your nation, whatever it is like the utmost value.
Sure.
Now for in our world, we still use the word patriotism, and that's a good thing, right? Patriotism is like the opposite of national. It's like the mirror image of nationalistic, right? They call us nationalistic. We call ourselves patriotic, right? To care for our nation. So if you really think deeply about, man, what does it mean to be patriotic? Is that a good thing? Do I want my neighbor to be patriotic? Do I want my president to be patriotic?
Right.
You start thinking through those things, and I think most people, most Americans, if they think beyond the first couple layers, will be like, you know what? Patriotism is probably a good thing.
Well, yeah, I guess if you took the time to think. But right now, unfortunately, patriotism is synonymous with this kind of crazy nationalistic fervor, which is synonymous with like Adolf Hitler. So now we've gone from patriot to Adolf Hitler in the same, short thought process. And that's unfortunate because that's not what we're talking about.
And he makes a great point here because, on one hand, some of our elites will say, well, nationalistic Americans, but then when an African tribe is very nationalistic to their tribe, they will applaud them. They will say, hey, look, we should protect them. We should care about them, whatnot. And Wilson makes a great point. He says basically, when we teach our people to, when we teach our kids not to respect our own nations, then they won't respect other nations. Right?
He said respect and honor are learned when kids are little. And if you fail to teach them at that point, you are the one graduating fascist and anarchist.
Yeah, in other words, you can't grow a generation that will disrespect Americans and patriotism in America, and then same time respect the French being patriotic to their own nation.
Sure.
Or this African tribe to be respectful to their nation, right? And the best way for our kids to be respectful, honoring of other nations and other boundaries and other rules is for them to respect our own. And then they're like, well, I'm patriotic, therefore I understand if you're patriotic to your nation.
Sure,
right?
Sure. It won't be trampling on each other's...
It's not conflicting to each other, yeah.
I like what he says there. Those who attempt to tear down respect for our own institutions, which we're seeing in America all over today, especially by our elites, are actually setting in motion a contempt for all institutions everywhere. And so then no one should be surprised when an alumnus of this multicultural curricular farrago heads down to their alma mater in order to shoot up the cafeteria. In other words, we're raising a bunch of people who have no loyalty to anything but themselves. And so it used to be, you graduate from your alma mater. Well, you love your alma mater, right? Hey, I'm a whatever graduate. And that was something that you celebrate. There was pride in being an alumnus. Now he's saying we teach the very students who are there to hate the very institution that trained them, to hate the nation that they're living in, and then we're surprised when they show back out on campus and shoot up the cafeteria. This is exactly what we train them to do, is to be loyal to no one or nothing, burn the whole system down, basically. So this is the challenge before us. And I like, maybe we can get into this a little bit today, but he says, we got the MAGA hat. He says the left wants to give us the MAC hat, accusing us of making American Christian. He's saying we should have a MACA hat, M-A-C-A, make America Christian again, because Wilson's argument is this is not something new or something that's never been done before. He says, in fact, it's been done multiple times before, and I'm quoting here, the first Christendom had a run of over 1,000 years, which I call pretty good. And not only has this Christian nationalism thing been done before, it's been done in America before. If we succeed, this will not be Christian America, it will be Christian America 2.0. This will be Christian America again. This will be America as the prodigal son, tired of the pig food, coming home to his father. So, and maybe without going into the depths, we can maybe pick this up next week when we're together. But his point is, we're eating a bunch of pig food right now, and maybe we're going to come to our senses and return to our Christian roots and our Christian values. As I preached, Sunday, the plea from God Almighty through Jeremiah the prophet to Judah was return to the ancient past, the old past, the well-worn past. And we can argue that from the very foundation of this nation, it has been founded on Christian values. Not necessarily everybody was a model Christian, but the values that led to the foundation of this nation were deeply rooted in the Scriptures. And he goes on to give a lot of examples of that very thing. And we can go back to America's founding, the Revolutionary War. The evidence is abundant that the ideas that shape this nation come from the Scriptures, the Christian Scriptures. So. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. We're not trying to do something new. We're actually trying to return to something that was. Now, do we have time to get into this? Probably not. I mean, because you were saying as soon as we talk about, we got into this a little bit on the last podcast. As soon as we talk about a Christian nation, you go back to the organized state-run religion, like when the church ran and controlled the state. And we get back to those spheres. Yeah. The church being elevated above state and family, and the church actually calling the shots like governmentally. That's not what Wilson's arguing for, or are we arguing for?
I just think that tension is really hard to navigate through. Now, he didn't mention the last 200 years. He said the last 1,000 years. So he's not talking about just America. He's talking about everything before America, which, quickly people will throw in the Inquisitions. They talk about the Anglican Church when Henry VIII made himself the head of the church. And are you going to, are you going to say, well, Henry VIII was a legitimate head of the church? And, is he going to be legit?
And I think, to speak for Mr. Wilson, although I don't know if that's always wise, but I think he would say, well, of course not, because that was the mistake again of the church trying to impose a single religious view. And he's saying, we need to get back to like the Apostles' Creed. We don't want to make everybody Anglicans or Methodists or Baptists or Catholic. Of course, we can talk about the Catholic Protestant problems and fight and wars and bloodshed over the history.
And my point is it's really complicated to get that dynamics correct.
To get it right.
To get it right. In America, when we first started, I think we were pretty good, but then quickly it probably tilted one way or the other, and right now it's tilting one or the other. I don't think it's this simple, especially when he talks about the 1,000-year history.
Well, and I think that's why he wrote this book, Mere Christendom, because I'll just say this: I'm always looking for those who are trying to see this, Christian understanding of an ordered, society. Because we do know that's the best way as Christian. We know that leads to flourishing. But without the control, without the exploitive behavior of fallen people even leading in the church, what's the balance, as you pointed out, the tension between the family, the state, and the church, and the realm of authority that God has given to them, and understanding that Jesus and his kingdom is outside of those realms, providing the authority and the inspiration for how those realms are supposed to operate.
I mean, and to me, the hardest part for that dynamics is the heart of the human being, who are the leaders. You're going to have leaders to a nation. And how are you going to reproduce through a system a leader who is charismatic, who is strong, but humble and broken and submitted to the Lordship of Jesus Christ? I mean, we have a hard enough time finding that in local churches today, right? And we find that in the governmental realm. So
and we know, because we're not utopianists, we know that's not going to happen this side of eternity. So we're living in a fallen, broken world, and we have to come up with the best systems and solutions possible, given the fact that we're not home yet.
Absolutely.
And that is the challenge. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, I hope you guys have enjoyed this today. Spread the podcast far and wide. We're obviously talking about important things, and as we're ramping up to a national election, just want to encourage everybody to stay engaged. Make sure you're registered. Make sure you vote. And make sure, most of all, we pray and we stand and we witness boldly to the truth of the gospel and why the gospel leads to maximum human flourishing, which is what this podcast is all about. So until next Thursday, have a great week. We'll look forward to seeing you then.